as you alluded to, and as I did as well, polling is showing softening support here in the U.S., especially among Republicans, but not only among Republicans. Let's go ahead and put this up on the screen. 48%, according to the AP, now say that they favor the U.S. providing weapons to Ukraine, with 29% opposed and 22% saying they're neither in favor nor opposed. Back in May of 2022, less than 3 months into the war, it was not 48%, it was 60% of U.S. adults who said they were in favor of sending Ukraine weapons. So you've seen significant erosion to now it's below majority support. You have Americans about evenly divided on sending government funds directly to Ukraine, so not shipping weapons, but actually just sending aid and support. 37% in favor and 38% opposed, with 23% saying neither. And you also have dismal views of Biden's handling at this point. Only 19% of Americans say they have a great deal of confidence in Biden's ability to handle the situation. 37% say they have some confidence. 43% say they have hardly any. And also, by the way, you know, at the beginning of this conflict, Saagar, you remember, we were covering with some credulity the polling saying that Americans were like, we will pay higher gas prices if it means supporting Ukraine. They're not quite feeling the same way these days. 59% now say limiting damage to the U.S. economy is more important than effectively sanctioning Russia, even if that means sanctions are less effective. Back in March of 22, the situation was reversed. A majority, 55%, said it was a bigger priority to sanction Russia effectively. And you can see, we're going to talk more about Trump in this show, but you can see this guy sniffed out where the winds are heading. He can see not only a clear divide on Ukraine that he can capitalize in the GOP primary, but also it's a smart bet for the general election in terms of this is increasingly going to become a partisan issue, which I actually think is really unfortunate because there's no reason why the line should be drawn in a clearly partisan way. But you can see independents in particular moving more to Ukraine skepticism and wondering, hey, how does this end? How does this end? Which I have never heard Joe Biden be able to articulate.
Not even that. Just consider, look, this is only February 23rd. This is before even the heavy fighting season. What's going to happen in the summer when, look, Biden says no more aid to Ukraine. We all know that they're going to at least ask Congress and try and blame the Republicans. When they're like, no, actually, we need another $50 billion for an extra 6 months. And then that would bring the total to $150 billion, more than we've ever spent on any foreign military aid ever in American history, going all the way back to the beginning of the Republic. Really, I mean, just consider what that will look like. And then think about it a year later. Let's say there's some miracle that or not even a miracle, you know, since there's a lot of bipartisan support. Let's say that extra $50 billion. Put it a year from now, or even a year and a half in the midst of the 2024 election. And you can just sniff out exactly where the trends here are all going. Now, I wouldn't say, you know, I wouldn't bank on it saying that there's no more aid or, you know, that the conflict could even be over by then. We may not even be talking about it. I highly doubt it, but it's certainly a possibility. Politically, though, Trump is clearly on the moving side of this issue, and support has eroding exactly as I think we both predicted this the entire time. Another really important one is, how is the rest of the world feeling? And this is where, look, you know, global public opinion is also always difficult, so take some of these with a grain of salt. But I think we could take from this at least something. So let's put this up there on the screen. It shows various different countries, not only the United States, but many others. So we have, and we can go ahead, guys, and put up A6, please, is you have India, which has at 54%, saying that the conflict between Russia and Ukraine needs to stop as soon as possible, even if it means Ukraine giving up control of territory. Turkey, and I'll remind you, Turkey is a NATO ally, saying 48%. Russia, they say 44%. China, they say 42%. The EU, Great Britain, and the United States with the much lowest. But you also see a major approval of this statement, of course, in Russia, saying Western dominance of the world needs to be pushed back, even if it means accepting Russian territorial aggression. 30% of Russians apparently supporting that. Very minimal numbers in India and in Turkey, but at least 12% there in China. And then finally, you have Ukraine needs to regain all of its territory, with some moderate support there from India and Turkey, zero support in Russia, moderate support in China, but then significant support, or the most significant really, in the EU, in Great Britain, and here in the US. So I think looking at that, and then also really just considering the way that people look at Russia and also with the United States, there's a separate part here where they ask whether which best reflects your view on Russia as it pertains to your country. In the US, 55% say it's an adversary. In the EU, 54%. In Great Britain, they say 65%. But in India, 51% say it's a necessary partner, which we must strategically cooperate. And some say it's even an ally that shares our interests and values. China and Russia is the same way. And significantly also in Turkey, 55 and 14% respectively, both say that Russia is a necessary partner and an ally. Just reflecting, the difference of how Turkey, which is a key NATO member, has behaved in all of this. And part of the reason why the initial talks between Ukraine and Russia, some of it was being brokered in Istanbul.
That's right.
How Istanbul and Erdogan specifically navigate future NATO expansion, that's still not a guarantee with Finland and with Sweden from what I've read so far, but also what the future looks like in terms of a NATO participatory who might be able to speak, with both sides of the conflict and bring things to an end. You can see some inclination of what that all would look like.
I think what is really clear when you look at all of these polls, and they have a lot of interesting breakdowns here, is that the West, and especially the US and the UK, have one view of this conflict and one view of Russia. And the rest of the world has a very different view. And if you'll recall, Saagar, when Lula was here from Brazil,
that was a big deal.
And there was a lot of shock over his comments about the war and about his desire to remain neutral so that he could potentially serve in some sort of a diplomatic role to ultimately broker a peace. There was a lot of shock about those comments, but in reality, he's reflecting what most of the rest of the world thinks about this conflict. And the one that stood out to me the most is they asked this question, okay, what do you think is the main reason the US stands behind Ukraine? And the only people who are really buying the, it's about democracy is the US. Even the other European countries, they see it more as either to defend Western dominance or to defend our own security. So they don't see it as much of this big conflict over democratic values. They see it as more of a classic geopolitical, strategic interest kind of a conflict. And certainly, China, Russia, Turkey, and India see it more that way as well. Russia and China say we're involved with Ukraine to defend Western dominance, and Turkey says predominantly to defend our own security. So the rest of the world is not viewing this as this grand conflict over values and the gloss that we put on it. They're seeing it in a much more sort of realism or realist perspective, which I think is interesting as well.
Absolutely. So that's where it is in terms of Ukraine right now. We gave you the first stop, kind of a summary of where things might be headed, and second, with global public opinion and where things are. And just keep in mind, the longer this thing goes on, the trend is only going in one direction. It ain't going the other way, even if Russian attacks have actually increased. It's possible a renewed Russian offensive could change things, but I don't see how that would ever change the shock of the initial bombing of Kyiv and much of the brutality that we saw in those early days. Now it's really just, battle of attrition and then the air war in terms of bombings and all that have been going on. So absent that, it's very likely that this all will move in a similar direction going forward.
Sadly, that's probably the best case scenario because certainly Russia has other tools and other weapons that they could deploy, not just in Ukraine, but around the world. So a grinding, horrifying war of attrition that involves much more economic destruction and many more deaths, including civilian deaths, is probably in the short term the best case scenario, which is absolutely horrifying. Hey guys, ready or not, 2024 is fully upon us now, and Saagar and I have been brainstorming ways that we can really up our game for this critical election.
Yeah, we rely on our premium subs to expand our coverage, to add staff, to upgrade the studio. We just want to give you the best independent coverage of this election, which is possible. So if you can help us out, become a premium subscriber today, breakingpoints.com, or the link is down here in the description video. It really means the world to us, and if you like what we're all about, this is the best possible way to keep us 100% independent, working only for you.